Not bad. Hello Internet, my name is Ace and today we're reviewing Crazy Rich Asians, directed by John M. Chu, starring Constance Wu, Henry Golding, and a lot of other people. If there is one thing I've always been looking for in Hollywood, it's more representation from people of different backgrounds and of different cultures. We were able to get that earlier this year with the release of Black Panther, which heavily influenced itself in African traditions and cultures. And now we have a movie that explores the Asian culture, most specifically Singaporean culture or Chinese culture. And we are able to see how Eastern ideologies and Western ideologies are able to clash with one another without really having to be too in your face about it. And as someone who is also a person, it was really gratifying to see such a large ensemble cast who is primarily of Asian descent. That's something we rarely ever get to see in Hollywood, and for once, no one's doing Kung Fu! It's great! I am so happy to see that Hollywood is taking Asian actors and actresses more seriously, and they're taking note of the fact that we really do have potential. Audiences do want to see more Asian actors and actresses on screen. Now, I'm not going to lean too heavily on that because I do not want to be biased in my review, so let's talk about the movie. How did the movie do? That was the cultural significance of it, but let's see how the movie held up. So right off the bat, the premise of this film, the plot, isn't exactly all that unique. It's something we've seen dozens, if not hundreds of times before in other films. But in all fairness, the strength of this film doesn't exactly come from its premise, from the way the plot is set up, because it's something that we've seen before, no doubt about that. A lot of films have done something similar to this before. No, the thing that makes this movie unique to me specifically is the fact that it's not entirely centered on the romance aspect between these two characters. But let's put that on hold for a bit. I just wanted to say that Constance Wu was really great to see in this film. She does a fantastic job portraying a woman who primarily was raised in the United States, and she's finally going to Asia, and she's kind of like a fish out of water. Everything is so new to her, and she does a great job portraying that fascination with the culture and the integration of both Western and Eastern cultures. I thought her portrayal was fantastic. Henry Golding does a great job as well. His relationship with her is really what kickstarts everything that happens in the movie, and so it has to be believable and something that you could root for. And I found myself actually caring about them, which was great. They were very good together. Their chemistry was on point. That's good. So, what I was saying earlier, one of the strongest things about this movie is that it's not entirely centered on the romance between the two main characters. It's not really where the film tries to keep focus on. I mean, for a large part of the movie, they're kind of like separated from each other. And I thought that was a really brave thing to do. If you're gonna have a movie like this, like a romance, what's one thing you really wouldn't expect? Just the two main characters not being together. Since this movie isn't relying too heavily on their romance, it's more relying on the themes and the message it wants to convey to its audience. And the message that it's really trying to convey is, how do two different cultures that are so drastically contrasting from one another, how did they interact and how did they clash without necessarily having to dominate one another? How can we find that perfect balance between the two, especially with a modern world which we live in today? How can these two cultures be able to coexist with one another? That's really one of the main themes that this movie is addressing. Not necessarily focusing on love. The love is just there to make it more understandable and relatable to the audience. But it conveys the theme of these mixing cultures so well, and it should really be commended for that. It shouldn't really be seen that much as a romantic film, as a drama film, because it really does address a lot of issues a lot of people are facing nowadays. It's extremely relatable in that regard, and I found myself really enjoying the film because of that. The supporting cast in this film was also really great. They never really overstayed their welcome. I'm gonna point out some specific people. Awkwafina was extremely entertaining in this movie. The audience was laughing at everything that she did, and I found her to be an enjoyable presence. Jeong was in the movie for a bit, and he never overstayed his welcome. He was there for exactly how long the movie needed him to be. A lot of other characters are tangled into this web, but the supporting characters were really there to support the growth of the main characters. Without them, the characters would kind of still be in a very static state. The characters are able to grow from their interactions between the supporting characters. Now, some of the characters, like the ones that are supposed to cause problems for them, they do, in fact, cause some problems. It's just they never really follow up on it. They just do one bad thing and the main character's like, oh my god, oh no, that happened. And then they address it another time and that's basically it. That's kind of what happens. There's a character that's introduced that I was expecting more from. She was set up to be like a really big rival for the main character, but in the end she didn't really do that much. It's just something I noticed. I was expecting more. And this is something that carries on into the main plot of the film as well. Michelle Yeoh's character, who is basically the mother of the main guy, she's very strict, very demanding. It's understandable why she is the way she is because of an introduction scene that happens at the very beginning of the movie that sets up her character extremely well. You understand why she's acting the way she is, so you can't really hate her that much for it. It's just the way things are. If you're someone who is of a culture that is similar to theirs, you can totally understand why she is the way she is. There are just some things, like some traditions, that are just so impossible to fight against, and I thought her character was an extremely well done embodiment of it, and she was even able to grow from the film as well, and that was extremely impressive. Now back to what I was saying earlier about how the plot was kind of affected by this writing that they did, where some things just happen and they don't really carry on, is when there was conflict between the mother, Michelle Yeoh, and Constance Wu's main character. When there was conflict between them, it was extremely interesting to watch, to see how these two characters have back and forth between one another. It was very interesting to see how two different ideologies clash with one another, how they debate with one another. While Michelle Yeoh's character is very conservative and well rooted in Eastern ideologies, Constance Wu's character, Rachel, grew up in the United States, where the ideology there is very self-promoting, where you chase your own dreams. So we get to see the answer to the question, is it more important to put your family first or put your own ambitions first? And that is a question that is asked by this movie, and it answers it very well. However, the conflict between the two characters takes a while to really get going. I was expecting it to happen early on in the film, but really it happens towards the second act. And it's kind of very scattered when it happens because a lot of things are happening to these characters. So they're not really seeing each other that often because they're going to different places. But when it does happen, it's very impactful. It just doesn't happen that often enough to leave a really, really big impact on the viewer. It still leaves an impact and something that a lot of people can relate to, not necessarily having to be Asian. It's just it doesn't happen enough to leave a really, really big impact, which is something I was kind of disappointed in, but it's okay. I'm not going to fault the movie that much for, because in the scenes where the characters are away from each other, it's because they're exploring different aspects of their character and different aspects of this culture. So I can forgive the movie for that. Now, there is a character named Astrid in the film, portrayed by Gemma Chan. I thought her character was really well done. She was like one of the nicer rich Asians, the more human ones. She wasn't really all that particular about the wealth. I mean, she was, but she didn't really let that get to her head. Her storyline, while important, and while I did enjoy her character, her storyline was really scattered around. Like, there's a lot happening in this movie, but her storyline was like so scattered that whenever it did pop up again, I'm like, oh right, she has a thing going on with her as well. And sometimes I forget about her storyline because of everything else that's happening, because the audience isn't really reminded that much of it. So that did kind of ruin the pacing of the movie a bit for me. If they would have referenced it a bit more, it would have been better, but I don't know. It's just something I noticed. Whenever her storyline showed up, I just didn't really have that much of an emotional attachment to it because of how scattered it was. So, is this movie perfect? The answer is no, not necessarily, but no movie is. This movie is extremely entertaining and fun, and it touches on very deep issues, but it does have a couple problems, but those problems don't really overshadow what this movie achieves. This is an extremely important film that highlights different cultures, and it highlights the potential Asian American or Asian actors have in Hollywood. It's as important as Black Panther was in that regard. It really does have a very big impact on the Asian community, because I am also a person, and I hope it starts something more. I hope we see more big ensemble casts that are of Asian descent, or it doesn't even have to be that. I would like to see more Asian actors take on bigger roles in films, that they don't necessarily have to be supporting cast. This film was important in that regard. The story it had to tell was entertaining and artful. The first couple minutes of this film were very entertaining to watch. Like the first act alone, I was thoroughly entertained. It was very creative, and I really enjoyed this movie. You don't have to be Asian to enjoy this movie. You just have to be a person, because everyone can relate to this film in one way or another. I mean, it's really scary seeing your future family, like if you're in a relationship, seeing her side or his side of the family. It's really intimidating, and this movie is something that we can all relate to in one way or another. It has characters that we can understand and empathize with. It's a very good film, and you really should watch it. If I had to give this film a grade, it would be an A-. I thought it was extremely fun, very creative, very thought-provoking. It lets audiences know the different themes and messages it wants to convey to them, especially to a more Western audience who doesn't necessarily understand Asian culture that much, because we just haven't had that much representation in Hollywood. This movie addresses the theme of family and how Asian culture specifically, not necessarily just us, there are other cultures too, but how Asian cultures and specifically are so rooted in family that they often don't put themselves first. And it conveys that message really well without necessarily being obnoxious about it. You really should check this movie out. Watch it. It's extremely fun. You're gonna enjoy it. So that's gonna have to do it for this review. I really hope you liked it. Thank you as always for watching. And if you want to see me review more movies, comment down below what those movies are. If you liked the video, like the video. If you didn't like the video, like it anyway. And as always, remember, never forget, stay nerdy.